Thankfully, 2020 is coming to a close and it has been an interesting year in gaming to say the least. We have seen some of the most anticipated games of the last decade finally get released. We've seen remasters and remakes galore, we've seen old series being resurrected, and we've also seen plenty of newcomers come into that arena as well. Today, let's take a look back at the biggest game releases of 2020, and also we'll talk about my personal favorite at the close. 2020 started off with Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training being the first game released on January 3rd, and who didn't want to start the new year off with answering math problems? This game is part of the Brain Age series from the last decade, and no one was really asking for its return, but yet, here it is. You'd think that you can only go up from here, but truth be told, January is home to some of the worst games of the year. Warcraft 3 was most fans' favorite Warcraft game, and when Reforged was announced, the excitement was obviously rumbling. But upon the release, the rumbling had taken a massively different tone. This is actually the worst reviewed game on Metacritic ever. And the main reason being is the game actually destroyed the old game that fans loved so much. Not only did Blizzard fail to live up to their promises on upgraded graphics, frame rate, and gameplay, they also modified the non-remastered version when this new one came out. They took out so many of the online options in the original and left it to be a mere shell of what it had been in the past. They did this to make both the original and the Reforged edition compatible. By doing so, they ruined both the original and the new game for almost all players. But that wasn't the only screwed up remaster of January. We also saw Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered get released, and Final Fantasy fans hated it. This was a game that was known for its local multiplayer back in the 2000s, and they completely removed it from the remaster. And not only that, the online multiplayer got limited to just simply being the dungeons instead of the whole game. The game didn't bomb as much as Warcraft 3, however, 2020 seemed to be off to a rough start, to say the least. February came along and decided to up the excitement a little bit and released the long-awaited Dreams on PS4 to bring about Nintendo nightmares for everyone involved. The game did get a lot of hype for having creepy-looking fan-made Nintendo games on it. However, Dreams opened up the door for so many fan-made games, and players and critics alike loved it. Even if you're not a creative person and you don't want to make your own games on the system, Dreams is still worth buying to play the thousands and thousands of creations that players around the world have created. February also saw what was one of the best action hack and slash games of the year, Darksiders Genesis. This game took the Darksiders formula, mixed it with Diablo, and the outcome was a truly unique experience that could engage players for hours. The story was funny, moveset exciting, and the challenge was perfect. Even after the close of the game, they gave enough post-game material to keep even the most dedicated fans satisfied. With both local and online co-op, this game was a win for sure. February was starting to look a little better. Now March though. March is the month where gaming really started to come to life with some of the biggest releases of the year, like I Am Ball. Sweet rolly action. March picked up though with the release of Ori and the Will of the Wisp early in the month, a beautifully crafted sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest. This Metroidvania is not only known for its exceptionally solid gameplay, but also for its highly emotional story. This is the full package for anyone looking for the best Metroidvania of the year. Nioh 2 was released just a few days behind that as another great sequel for the year. This game took everything fans loved in the first game and perfected it. Capitalizing on the Dark Souls formula, the Nioh series pulls players who are searching for the ultimate challenge set in medieval Japan. If you missed out on this one, just wait until 2021 and you can get to remaster it on the PS5, which will include the first and the second game, and you can experience them all at once. The next big release in March was the best-selling game of the year and also one of the best-selling games of all time. I Am Ball. Wait. Wrong game again. Animal Crossing New Horizons, allowing players to take control of their own island, complete daily tasks, and construct the world of their dreams. They could also journey to other people's islands to explore their creations. While this game would have been successful on its own, it happened to release at the same time the world began to quarantine, leaving people isolated in their own homes. Animal Crossing allowed them to live out their social lives in a bit of a more virtual world, and everyone seemed to get involved at that point. even big companies like KFC. But don't worry, the year isn't over for KFC just yet. On the same day that Animal Crossing released, another groundbreaking game also launched. Doom Eternal. Taking everything great from the 2016 Doom and putting players back into the hellish environments, Doom Eternal was a massive success. Some players didn't like the addition of quite so many platforming elements, but it was most certainly the shooter game of the year. Or was it? Because March also saw Half-Life make a return after a 13-year hiatus. No, it wasn't the Half-Life 3 that we all wanted, but with Half-Life Alyx we probably got the best VR in existence. Taking place between Half-Life 1 and 2, we got a great survival horror shooter experience which became the best-selling VR game of all time. Big surprise. But that wasn't all for March. March came to a close with the re-release of a game called Another World, which is one of the best 2D platformers of the 1990s. Seriously, what other game had killer slugs like this? Overall, March was a wonderful month for gamers. April was like January done correctly because both months saw mostly remakes. However, the April remakes were phenomenal. First, we had the Resident Evil 3 remake, which took players back to the late 90s to try to survive against a nemesis. The game was beautiful and continued in the same direction as the Resident Evil 2 remake. Now, some players felt the game was a bit on the short side for a $60 game because you could complete it in about 6 hours, but there's no one out there who can deny that the 6 hours that you did get to play were absolutely excellent. The second remake that we saw of April was Final Fantasy VII Remake, and this game was amazing. The game took Square Enix more than 5 years to publish after its initial announcement, but the wait was worth it. With a fully revamped battle system, more in-depth story, and the charm of the original, it drew new and old players into the series. While the remake only covers the first third of the original game, this was necessary to expand the story as much as they did. The second and third parts will be coming in the next few years, which just gives players more to look forward to in the future. The third remake for the month of April was also from Square Enix and was the SNES game Trials of Mana. Originally just released in Japan, this remake allowed Western audiences to play the game for the first time and also now in full 3D environments. This wasn't my personal favorite, coming to it shortly after finishing Final Fantasy VII Remake. However, fans of the Mana series seemed to really love it and felt it was a very faithful remake of the classic that they loved so much. While March and April were such heavy hitter months for gamers, May took a small step back but still released some really quality games that are definitely worth players' times. First, Minecraft decided to take its hand to the Diablo formula and release Minecraft Dungeons. And despite having a fair amount of bugs and glitches, this is one of the most charming Diablo clones out there. Also, with DLC for this game coming every 2 months, it continues to keep players involved. Maneater also got released around this time for summer to fuel everyone's fear of being eaten alive by a shark. However, in this game, you actually get to play as the killer shark, so it's cool to update the old shark games in a different formula. The month closed out with Super Mash, a game that allows you to smash together two opposing types of games to create a new one, like RPG and platformer. Honestly, the game looked confusing and sort of dumb, and players agreed. And what would 2020 be without another gaming controversy? The Last of Us Part 2. Critics seemed to love this game, but players were fairly mixed, if not leaning towards a negative side. And it wasn't because of the gameplay, because that was definitely improved, and it wasn't because of the graphics, because that was definitely improved, but it was mainly because of the story. They tended to kill off some of the beloved characters, and they had them act and react to situations in totally different manners than they did in the first game. It felt like fan service wasn't really given for many players, and this was definitely a dividing game of 2020. But the biggest news in June was that the KFC was entering into the console business with the KF console, or is it the KFC console? I don't know, I need to hear it said in person. A chicken warmer and a gaming system with specs higher than the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Everyone honestly thought it was a joke, so did I, but at the close of 2020, this has been proven real and we'll see a release in 2021. Also in June, Carry On was launched and allowed players to take control of a monster working its way through a facility, killing everyone in its path. It was a cool take on horror games, and with its retro style, it made for one of the more unique indie titles of the year. Command & Conquer Remastered Collection also launched this month and gave players exactly what they wanted. The old game with upgraded graphics and better online support. Blizzard really should have followed this idea with their Warcraft remaster, because this one was successful. There wasn't really much to talk about when it came out or when it was released, and that's a shame because the originals were some of the greatest games of all time, and this remake really does it a lot of justice.
One hell of a ride.
July brought back with it a much needed revival of the series Paper Mario with its newest entry, Paper Mario the Origami King. Nintendo had this game in development for years, but they kept it quiet as a surprise for Mario's 35th anniversary, and what a surprise it really was. I personally loved the game overall because the story was great, wonderful new characters like Bobby and Olivia were introduced, and wonderful boss battles. Sure, the battle system with smaller enemies wasn't the best, but considering the overall charm of the game, I felt this was a wonderful addition to the series. The final big PS4 game dropped this month as well with the release of Ghost of Tsushima. Now this was once again taking players back to medieval Japan, but there's a more historical approach than the Neo games, so it's really a sort of a different atmosphere. With some of the most stunning graphics that the system has to offer so far, and an engaging story like this, it quickly became many players' game of the year. With DLC content continuing to drop as well, adding co-op and things like that, this game will be on their radar for a long time to come. And what would a summer month be without a new entry into the Harvest Moon franchise? And not the fake franchise, but the real one, Story of Seasons. Story of Seasons Friends of Mineral Town was launched and allowed players to once again create their own farm, form relationships, and live out an entirely virtual life out in the country. Many players have gravitated toward Animal Crossing over the summer, but there is always a reason to take yourself back to the farm life instead. August was a fairly dry month, however, it did lead to one of the funnest, shortest-lived sensations of the 2020 gaming, Fall Guys, throwing you into a set of random minigames with 60 strangers and letting you compete through each one until only one player emerges as the champion. The minigames all play out similar to Mario Party and are a ton of fun for several hours, and they do slowly get less fun after that. But with the continual rollout of various seasons, the developers are attempting to keep the gameplay experience fresh and exciting. Now for players who were looking for a true Dark Souls clone, the release of Mortal Shell in August was exactly what they were hoping for. While it looks fantastic and captured many elements of the Dark Souls series, it ultimately felt a little hollow and sort of shallow. You get to choose between 4 different bodies to complete the levels, but you never really get to customize any of these characters. It will satisfy Dark Souls players overall, but it was a short-lived experience and the game will probably be forgotten as the years pass by. Now this was a fun month, not groundbreaking, but a fun month. We saw the re-release of 3 of the most classic Mario games ever to exist with the Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection. Nintendo could have done a little bit more on the remastering them, or add some additional content, but just by themselves, it was great to see these 3 games come back to the spotlight. Now speaking of a great remaster, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake hit the shelves and it was phenomenal. So I guess it really wasn't a remaster, it was definitely a remake. Because it took all the fun of the old games and didn't change anything except the graphics and a few quality of life improvements like having manuals in the first game and now a wonderful online multiplayer. This game was nostalgia to the max, and if you loved the games back in the day, you will 100% love this game as well. They even left the tapes in the game. The tapes! So wonderful. September also saw the release of Hades on the Switch. Yes, this game technically came out last year on the PC, however it wasn't until its release on the Switch that this game actually achieved the level of fame that it currently has. You take control of Hades' son and you attempt to escape from hell. This game is an action-adventure roguelike game and is probably one of the best roguelike games to have ever existed. This is mainly due to not only the solid gameplay, but also that the story continues to develop every time you lose a round, so when you die, it's not really that big of a deal because you actually get to enjoy the story. Now for $25 on the eShop, you'll be surprised how engaging this game is and how many hours you'll log into it. It has left many players saying that this is their game of the year, even over all the big AAA games. This month felt like we were back in the 1980s. First off, we got a battle royale called Super Mario Bros. 35 where you and 35 of your buddies or online strangers can battle through the original Mario levels until only one player remains. The game will only be with us until around March, which doesn't make any sense at all, but Nintendo said that's the end and you can't play it anymore, so that is what it is. But until then, it will remain one of the most fun retro challenges you can play in 2020. We also saw the release of a G.I. Joe and a Transformers game. G.I. Joe Operation Blackout took more of a shooter style, while Transformers Battlegrounds focused more on the tactical and strategy atmosphere. They both took their series back to their roots with focusing on what they looked like actually in the 1980s, and it's a great entrance points for both original and new fans of the series. Crash 4 was also launched to mostly mediocre fanfare, but if you're a fan of the original series, you are sure to love this game as well. And finally, October brought the real-life Mario Kart racer with Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. This allowed players to set up Mario Kart courses in their home, use actual remote-controlled carts to race through them, and their Switch for the first-person view. Some amazing courses were made by fans, and pets around the world were ecstatic for the new additions to their homes. Probably the biggest month in gaming for the year, and actually the last few years, because we saw the launch of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. While the Xbox Series X didn't drop with exclusives, Sony brought the goods. First off, Demon's Souls, a complete remake of the PlayStation 3 classic, was a launch title, and enough good things can't be said about this game. They kept all the core mechanics of the original, but brought some of the quality of life improvements to make one of the most satisfying Souls experiences out there. Spider-Man Miles Morales was also a launch title and took everything that was perfect from the PS4 Spider-Man game and crafted an amazing winter experience with Miles Morales. The game was a bit on the shorter side, but many players felt that despite that, it was still some of the most fun that they had the entire year. Other launch titles obviously hit around the same time, but these two big ones did most of the overshadowing. Also launching but not exclusives were Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Call of Duty Cold War. Both were entries to nearly yearly series and met with mostly positive reviews. Valhalla tended to borrow a bit more from the newest God of War game, but with its own take on the Viking mythology. Call of Duty Cold War, while most players cited a wonderful single-player experience, they said it tended to fall a bit short on the multiplayer side because they were attempting to integrate that game into the World at War arena. Both games were huge hits for the fall though. Is this the most controversial month? Yes, I do believe it is. Cyberpunk 2077 hit shelves in December after being in development for nearly 8 years, and if you were a PC player, that dedication showed off. However, if you were a console player, you got a very inferior product. From poor character models to horrible frame rates to vehicles being stuck in the ground and game-breaking glitches, Cyberpunk 2077 was a mess. So much so that refunds were being offered and it was even taken off the PlayStation Store itself. CD Projekt Red weren't quite as honest as they should have been about the console version, and we'll see how that really affects them in the future. December also saw the Switch release of Among Us. This game has been one of the biggest quarantine games of the year for mobile and PC players despite being released a few years earlier. It seems like it's in its last days of popularity, so Nintendo is a little bit behind on getting this title out to its fans. The final hit of the year though would have to be the Breath of the Wild clone Immortals Phoenix Rising. Taking place in Greek mythology, this is the perfect open world game for players who have already gone through Breath of the Wild until they're just sick of it. While several mechanics are completely different than Breath of the Wild, it is very obvious where the majority of their inspiration came from. Overall, 2020 for gaming has actually been one of the biggest years in gaming that we've had in quite a while. We got 2 new systems, one of the best-selling games of all time, remakes of so many classics, and several new IPs all in 1 year. And when looking at all the games that came out this year, I had so many games that I really did love playing, but I always like to pick one game as my favorite game for the year. And for this year, it's going to come down between Final Fantasy VII Remake and Demon's Souls Remake. I feel sort of bad basically picking 2 older games, but the remakes were truly amazing because they made each game feel like a brand new game. But between these 2, I'm probably going to have to go with the Final Fantasy VII Remake as my game of the year because it went just a little further beyond what a traditional remake was. The story was expanded so greatly, and I love the new battle system in the game. Literally everything about the game was revamped while still keeping that original charm. Now, I probably will end up putting more hours into Demon's Souls because I like that online experience, but the Final Fantasy VII Remake had me more engaged in the overall game throughout my experience. So I feel like it's just a more solid game and well-made game overall. But what was your favorite game of 2020? Were there any big game releases that I failed to mention in this video? Comment down below your thoughts, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and as always, go out there, find a great game to play, and just simply have a great rest of the day.